To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me.
In today's conversation, Jim and I perform a forensic audit of Jim's soul. We map the delta from 1992 market fundamentalism to a worldview grounded in emergence. Using Vervaeke's four ways of knowing, reveal how the system programs our very desires and where the sustainability wall finally hits. The path to agency begins by cutting the signal of the status quo. Have fun. Pick a time where you have some major event happening for Jim at that time and his worldview, so that you can really anchor your recollection in that event.
Let's do late 1992, where I went back to
Okay.
be a corporate guy.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the John Vervaeke framework of the propositional, the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory knowing, and look at the three most salient or five most salient, the few most salient things in each of those categories, and try to understand why they are most salient. And we will do that for Jim circa end of 1992, if you can channel that Jim. And then we will do that for Jim today. And then we will run a delta analysis on those and see what is the difference in worldview on those two. So that's a big task. But let's see how far we get.
All righty, fire her up.
All right, so let's start with the easy. Let's maybe do one thing first to get into the groove. Let's give us a little account of the Jim in that time. What's it like to be Jim in that time? So that you can get back into that mood, and then we go into the propositional, and you give us the three most important, most salient propositions in that Jim.
In the propositions, okay, yeah, that time, late 1992, I had done a couple of four startups actually, three of them successfully, one of them sort of call it a draw, and I still had the fourth one. It was designed to fit my mindset of the time, which was no employees, and I had the leading online bulletin board for Visual Basic developers, and it was throwing off like $300,000 a year. Right? So it was a quite profitable little thing. I could do it all myself, you know. And I was about to hire somebody to help me, and I got a call from a friend of mine who had been at my first startup and had stayed with the company that acquired us and was like a group CEO in that group at that time. And he called me up and said, "Jim, I got a hell of a problem over here. Our tech operation, our CTO quit, and I don't know what the hell's going on." He's a very good business guy, but don't know diddly squat about technology. You know, he's one of these guys that you take off their shoes to count to 11 kind of thing. But he's extremely good business guy. Anyway, so I said, "All right, I'll come over, give you 2 days. I'll sniff around." And at the time, I had made enough money to live without working relatively modestly, right? I owned my house. Did I own it outright at that time? If not, it was close. And, my wife and I never were fancy folks, and I drove a old pickup truck, and so I didn't really need to work, but I kept busy with doing various little consulting projects and stuff. And I charged outrageous prices for my consulting so that I didn't have to work very many hours, like 20 hours a month, something like that. And so anyway, I said, okay, I'll come over and give you 2 hours at my normal exorbitant rate. And I checked it out. I said, well, things are pretty messed up here. I'll have to give you a third day. So I did that, and I gave the report. And I said, man, you don't know how screwed up this shit is. You don't even have a good backup of all your data. And you are in the data vending business. If something were to happen, you would be seriously fucked, right? And there was many other problems. There was the internal, just everything you can imagine was messed up, right? And so he said, "Oh, would you come on and spend 2 months, like at least beginning the unfuckingness and hiring somebody and all this stuff?" And I thought about it, and I quoted him a very high price, and he immediately said yes. I go, God damn it, quoted too low. But it was still enough for me to live on for more than a year. Right?
Okay.
Probably 2 years or 2 months work. And so I started digging into it. And I don't know, the problems were fixable. And mostly it was they didn't have the right talent. I hired a bunch of people, this and that. I don't know, about halfway through it, they, I don't know, I guess the word went up the chain of command, and they said, see if you can hire this guy. God. So they started asking me if I'd want to come on as a sort of a subgroup executive where I would run 3 businesses and this and that. They set me up to be interviewed by the big boss. And I go, God, I really want to do this. So quoted him, again, a fairly ridiculous, not that ridiculous in retrospect, but a pretty serious price. And I said, I only do it for 2 years. Yeah. They interviewed me and they said, okay, you're hired. I go, okay, I'll do it for 2 years. And so I came in to be a corporate dude in Thomson Corporation, today Thomson Reuters. And we were in the financial information division. We had 6 different businesses in different aspects of financial information that my buddy was the head dude of, and I was like the head of 3 of those, right? And so it was fun, and it kind of rejuiced my action orientation, right? I had enjoyed being the one-man entrepreneur, making lots of money just on my own, no employees to deal with. It was great, but I realized how much I enjoyed managing people, developing people, hiring people, building culture, and all that sort of stuff. So I fell right into it, and so here I was, a corporate guy by January 1st, 1993. And Thomson was an interesting company in that it was family controlled, even though it was publicly traded. The Thomson family owned about 2/3 of it. And over the next few years, I got to know the Thomson family reasonably well. And they were very ethical, very well-grounded folks. On the other hand, they were definitely about economic performance, right? But they would not do things they thought were immoral, right? Which I thought was quite good. There was even a story about them accidentally buying a TV guide in Scotland that's main revenue source was prostitution advertising in the back. And they turned around immediately and sold it at a loss. And so they did not want to be in the prostitution advertising business. But our ethos was definitely make money, right? And in particular, we had our own kind of way we did our own accounting. It was a little different than traditional GAAP accounting, and our bonuses were scored on this Thomson accounting and this and that, and so I got into playing that game, right? And then thinking through our various businesses, what competitive advantage did we have? Where did we not have competitive advantages? Where should we be investing? Because one of the good things about the Thomson family was they were totally open to investing in even new things, so long as you could make a good business case and how it would be measured, right? And I took advantage of that quite a bit. And, I think we did a pretty good job with our businesses, and I was kind of enjoying it. And so that was me, 1993.
Okay.
Back in the hard-nosed game of business.
Okay. Now, take a moment and get in touch with that Jim, hard-nosed business Jim, and pull up the one, two, three, few more most salient propositions that you would build your worldview on, knowingly or not, but not more, and give them names so we can address them. So three.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, sort of the big worldview. You may want to do four because this may not be relevant.
Okay.
My worldview of, let's call it metaphysics and ontology,
Mm-hmm.
was still in one sense similar to where I currently am, in one sense not, which is at the time I was still a materialist of some sort, believed the universe actually existed, believed it was lawful, believed it was, I probably believed more than I should have that it was knowable. Okay, there's an interesting distinction.
Okay.
And that humanity was on its way to eventually figuring things out, and that religion was bunk, and more or less many of the same things I have today foundationally in my worldview. Biggest difference was I did not at that time understand complexity and emergence. And I probably was closer to being a naive Newtonian than would. That's sort of embarrassing in retrospect. Though, of course, I also knew about relativity and quantum mechanics, so I wasn't a naive Newtonian, but I was. But nonetheless, probably Newtonianism was where my underlying creator of propositions was probably still overweighted to naive Newtonianism. Which almost everybody's at that point was, right?
Probably,
that we just thought the world was sort of mechanical, and we could, God damn it, we could figure it out. And so that was one.
But I think if it feels slightly embarrassing from the perspective of today, Jim, then probably you're onto something that is correct. So let's at least it's interesting. So let's swing with that more. What other slightly embarrassing propositions did you build on?
Oh, the other one was far more embarrassing than that, which was markets are the smartest thing around, right?
Okay.
At that point, I had been a lifelong Republican, kind of a Goldwater Republican he ran for president in '64. He was militantly anti-communist, strongly free market. And the thing that saved him from my perspective, he was also strong on civil liberties, right? He was not one of these hateful kinds of Republicans. But I had just switched. I did vote for Clinton in '92. Not for any, Clinton was a pretty right-wing Democrat. I used to often refer to him as a country club Republican. He was the guy that nailed in neoliberalism in America. And I was fine with that. And in '96, I voted for Dole, the Republican candidate, who was also kind of a moderate center-right kind of guy. So I was still a center-right kind of guy and thought that markets were the smartest things humans ever created. And to the degree we have problems, little adjustments on the knobs of the market will solve them. So, for instance, I was vaguely aware of climate change at that time. I knew it was an issue. I knew it was real because of the fact that basic physical chemistry will prove that more CO2 and methane will trap more solar energy within the atmosphere. So I knew those things, but I wasn't particularly worried about it. And I said, well, easy enough. We'll just put a carbon tax on it, right? And if we put a carbon tax, in fact, I even figured out the numbers. Start at $20 a ton, move to $200 a ton over 20 years. It'd be trivial to fix the problem. So I was a market sort of fundamentalist in 1993, and even beyond that, I was an efficient market hypothesis guy, which is while any given artifact of the market is likely to be wrong, like what should the stock price be of a company? On average, the market was astoundingly efficient at allocation. And the average return on equity is like just what it should be. So I was a market fundamentalist, a believer in the power of markets, and that goddamn commies, they were a bunch of idiots, and hippies weren't much better.
Yeah, you would not have spoken to me At least not in that look at that time, probably.
Yep, yeah. You would have said, okay, here's a center-right neoliberal corporate executive.
Okay, so that's naive Newtonianism and market fundamentalist. What's the third?
What was the third? Propositional.
Oh, we can stick with two. I mean, these are two big and powerful ones.
Yeah, there's a third one, which is
Mhm.
related to the second one, which people are perfectly capable of figuring out their own desires and how to participate in a market economy. And that I did not really understand, well, I didn't understand really at all, the idea that late stage capitalism was programming our desires into us. I thought that, well, whatever people wanted is what people wanted, and they're rational enough to ascertain what their needs and wants are, and none of my business what they want. Right?
Okay, so we have naive Newtonianism, market fundamentalist, and the belief that people are fundamentally rational. Let's take a brief moment for each of them to ask why you think these were so relevant to you. What made them centerpieces of your worldview on the propositional scale? Why what do they do?
Well, the first one, I had been a business guy since I graduated from college in one form or another, and had dug in pretty deeply into the game of business, and had read a fair bit of economics, including in college, and also a fair bit afterwards. And I could see the inner logic of the market and monetary signaling in terms of a ratchet towards efficiency. But what I didn't properly ascertain was externalities, and nor did I understand something that's not exactly formal externalities, but the trajectory that a society is on, right? That I did not consider what the emergent result would be. And of course, that partially comes from the naive Newtonianism, right? If you had a society that was chasing money on money return optimization. So I was essentially blind to all that phenomena.
Okay, so that proposition was driven by a belief that efficiency in itself is a good thing, and that there was no need to look into large distances, like to follow the trajectory of a society or a civilization into the long term. There was no need because things would be fixed by the markets and by the mechanisms. Is that about
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I like actually the framing there. Let me extend the framing a little bit.
Okay.
I was in classic hill climber mode, right?
Hmm.
Which is, I would see a hill and I'd go up to the top and claim it, right? And I'd
Hmm.
lead a squad of guys up there to do it, and, kill anybody that's on the top of the hill. It's our hill.
Hmm.
And I don't even know if I knew the concept of the difference between local maxima and global maxima. I may have never even
Hmm.
read that, or if I had, it did not make a big impact on me. I was in the hill
Hmm.
climbing business, and
Okay.
and I think that's an interesting way to kind of parameterize that more precisely.
Okay. So let's try and hop over to the procedural. What kind of procedural knowledge elements are most salient to you in that 92 Jim? What are the things that you've acquired skills in that are that you would say are absolutely necessary for that Jim to function in the world and in alignment with his worldview?
Yeah, I would say I don't know where this came from because I didn't take only really one course in college, but I had learned along the way to think in financial terms. Whenever I started a company, or even if I worked at a company, I was the guy in charge of the spreadsheet, right? And my spreadsheets were nuts. They were huge, right? And I'd always tell people I'm quite, quote, Dwight Eisenhower, the American leader of the Normandy invasion, etc., which is planning is useless, but plans are indispensable. And so I never believed that my plans would work out, but but my planning, deep planning, insanely deep planning, spreadsheets that you had to tape together 30 sheets of paper to put them on the wall, that kind of spreadsheet. Understanding the moving parts of your business and your personal life, actually, at the level of a hugely complex spreadsheet model allowed you to navigate far more efficiently when you were actually playing the game. So I would say that is certainly a superpower that I had, which amazed people. And in most businesses, you didn't have people that had that skill. And so that was certainly one. Second one, I was really good at hiring people. And I think that came from my startup epoch, where we had no money. And so the game we were always trying to play was talent versus money arbitrage. And so, I'd hire weird ass people, but turned out to be really good, right? Like the CTO of my second company was 24 years old and had dropped out of college his sophomore year, his second year of college. But I smelled something about this guy, that this guy would be fucking incredible. And he was. Our second startup was the most successful of all my businesses. It was the only business I ever participated in that never had a serious problem, was profitable from the first month after we introduced the product, and just fucking roared. I've been involved either as an investor, a principal, an advisor, a board member on like 19 ventures. And it's the only one that just went, right? And every other one was a goddamn struggle, right? Including the 13 or 14 that worked. And this guy was a big part of the reason it worked. So, but I'd hire I'd hire like a guy who's a semi-professional symphony bassoon player, right? But he also ended up as the CTO of one of my businesses after first being a divisional tech leader, etc. Another guy I interviewed 3 times, and I really liked him, but he was clearly holding something back. So I just said, X, what is it you're not telling me? There's something you're not telling me. I really like you, but no secrets between us dudes, right? So he confessed that he was a heroin addict, but he went to Narcotics Anonymous every day, and that he needed to do that. And as long as he did that, he would stay straight, and he would be, what he was, which was a really, really good user interface PC developer at about 30% below market price, right? And so I said, okay, well, thanks for telling me. I don't have any problem with that. And but we're going to assign Junior here, our most junior developer, to make sure your ass gets to Narcotics Anonymous every day. And he goes, that would be great. And this guy turned out to be phenomenal, right? I could go down and all down this list, especially of my startup period, of these interesting and quirky people that I hired. And hardly any of them had computer science degrees from reputable universities, but they were really good. Working for Thomson, where I had the budget to hire who I wanted, I could, didn't have to buy them at a big discount. But so instead, I could buy, A+ talent for a little bit above market price. That became my new arbitrage. That particularly in DC area, where the technical industries were dominated by beltway bandits, guys that do contracting for the government, particularly defense and intelligence. All the pay is very skewed to what degrees do you have and how many years experience do you have, not to your quality, right? And so I discovered that you could arbitrage the fuck out of that, right? Which is if they're going to pay an A+ player the same as a C- player, then I could pay the A+ player 15% more, and that's a huge win, because an A+ player is equal to about 15 C- players. And so I was, let's say, hiring became a superpower. It was always a superpower.
Okay.
I don't know why. Because I'm really good talking to people and getting behind the person, asking weird ass questions and stuff. I put my hiring ability up against absolutely anybody's. And then the third is motivation and leadership. Because I actually learn what the business does, right? I don't know if you ever worked in a big corporation, but a big corporation, there are a lot of fucking bosses don't know shit, right? As my father would say, they couldn't pour piss out of a rubber boot, even if the instructions were emblazoned on the heel. They're just, they hold on to their desk, hoping they don't get fired. Any business I ever got involved in at any level, including public company CEO, I drilled down until I understood the fucking business, right? I could talk to anybody in the company about almost anything. Now, they obviously knew more than I did about most of it, but, and I found that was a hugely important part of leadership, because you could actually talk to people about what they did. And a goodly part of my day was just walking around, plopping my fat ass down on a chair in somebody's office and saying, hey, what's happening? What's going on? What are you working on? Right. And and I would sometimes give them ideas, but at a minimum, I'd know what's actually happening in the unit. And by sampling what people are working on, I could tell if they're unhappy, I could tell if their bosses weren't giving them the right direction. Like that. So I would say those in my business life, and I'd say those things actually kind of bled over to my personal life too. I was always very, very conservative in personal finance, lived very tightly. As I said, what the fuck? Why would I want to squander a lot of money on horse shit, right? And I understood my financial trajectory and that I was over the line of not needing any more money if I didn't really want any more money. But and in my personal life, I also had a farm, which we managed at the time. And working a farm, there's all kinds of busted shit you got to fix and all that. Having a good ability to execute on stuff was important. So I would say those things and the penumbra around them were kind of three of my major capacities at that time.
And if you contextualize that, what are some of the reasons why you say these are the most important? The why behind them. What are they useful? You said a lot of things around that already, so maybe there's something else specifically to add.
Well, let's ask those three. Now, this does get into a more complexity view, which is that I did know at the time that business was a multidimensional game, right? That turning one lever isn't sufficient to optimize the performance of a business unit or a life, for that matter. And so I understood that people was key in business. Understanding the economic game of business and really be able to see and understand how the numbers work together, and then execution. You could have good people understand the numbers, even have a good strategy, but if you couldn't execute, I've seen many a good business that failed or didn't achieve what it could have because of lack of execution. And so the leadership and motivational aspects, I always believed, were why I was an exceptionally good operating guy. My businesses fucking ran well, right, relative to, other businesses of that sort. And so I saw business, at least intuitively and maybe analytically, I don't really remember, as having at least those three important dimensions. And I happened to discover I was good at all three of them.
That seems to be very, very much in line with the propositions you mentioned. Let's hop over to the perspectival. So the ability to take on various perspectives. So what are some of the perspectives, if any, that are relevant for Gym 92 to be able to inhabit and or that you actually actively inhabited, and why?
Yeah, I would say I was not a very perspectival guy at the time, right? I had my ideas. I thought they were right. God damn it. And I'll show you, right? I would say the one perspectival divergence, which was very useful and helpful to me, was from my wife, right? She was never too interested in corporate America or all the crazy ass shit I did. She was a much more grounded person. She was a landscaper, a gardener, taught Head Start, which is a preschool program for poor kids in America. And she also insisted that I not be a monomaniacal business dude, right? For instance, we agreed that I would not generally work on the weekends, right? That would be family time, that we have our farm, which was one of our dreams. We spent a lot of time there, all that sort of stuff. So I would say that in many ways I was monomaniacal, my own perspective, but I also benefited tremendously by my wife's much more grounded and social and familial perspective. And I adopted it. I actually did stick with those things and did think they're important, and continue to tell people today, which is much harder in the day of grinding as the ethos, right? That take the fucking weekend off. My prediction is you'll actually accomplish more in your 5 days of 11 or 12-hour days, as long as you go do something entirely different on the weekend.
But let's go into the delta analysis later. Okay, so not very perspectival, and Celia, your wife, gave you some perspective, but that was the prime source, so to say. What about participatory knowing? The actual, like embodied, lived knowing, which is the hardest to really pinpoint, I think. But what would you say are some of the most salient aspect of being in life for Jim 92?
Yeah, being in life. Was always very social. Could talk to anybody about anything, and we had our networks of friends, and that was good. 92, I was 93, was father of a 4-year-old, and so there was a lot of participating with the other parents, and just being a general citizen of preschool kids, which a couple of years later I ended up being an assistant coach of the softball team, things of that sort. So I lived this sort of a fairly normal upper middle class, between middle class and upper middle class life, even though I had enough money to be a super upper middle class guy if we wanted. But we decided that where we liked to be was kind of like at the top of middle class, right before upper middle class. Our house was far smaller than it needed to be. Just our cars were a lot older. Just so that those are much more. I like those people better, and my wife certainly did too. So I did that. The other participatory thing that's actually quite probably important is, as you know, I was one of the earliest people into the online world. I worked at the Source starting in 1980, which was the world's first consumer online service. And I designed our email product, our bulletin board product. I was co-product manager for probably the first precursor to social media. I invented blogging, did a number of interesting, very early things. And after I left there in 1982 to start my own company, which were hard-nosed business information systems aimed at big corporations in Wall Street. So they were no fun, but they were profitable, right? They were fun to build because we were using cutting-edge technology. But I also remained engaged in the online world through all the various pre-internet services, CompuServe, Genie, AOL when it became a thing. And so I always had a quite rich online life, and online was very different in those days because you paid for the service, no advertising. And people were on it because they got value for what they were paying for. And hence the systems were designed to be relatively efficient. And in, say, CompuServe, which is where I spent most of my time, say from 82 to 87, 88, it was mostly organized around special interest groups, graphics programming, compression, farming, now I think about it, there was actually a sustainability group that I got. They called it the community group, but it was really talking about precursors to eco villages and stuff. And there was
Wow.
also cool online multiplayer games, which I also like. So participatory, probably very unusually, in the number of hours per month I spent on activities. The amount I spent online was very unusual for the 1980s.
Okay, you have social layer, and that you're able to talk to anyone about anything. And then you highlighted being a father and so all of the container of that up to being in a by choice middle to upper middle class, so that you're conscious situational choice of where you want to be, and the very, very rich online life. You said why the conscious choice about the how you lived, and also the engagement with family, etc. That was probably driven by the perspectival push by your wife. Why the social and why the online? What are the drivers for that in your participatory knowing element of the worldview in Gym 92?
Yeah, I would say the social basically just grew out of being in the community, having kids, and of course I kept in touch with my old buddies from the old neighborhood. We'd go hunting and fishing. Yeah, hunting and fishing. I forgot about that. Always a fair bit of that. Both my old buddies from my old neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that also continued. And they were totally different. These were completely non-intellectual people, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Carpentry subcontractors, surveyor, guy who did civil engineering for the Navy, guy who did had a pretty good size construction company. Another guy was an electrician. So anyway, these were good, capable Americans, but not intellectuals or at least big business people. There were small business to medium business people. And or a lot of them were just employees for other people. So yeah, that was also important. Forgot all about that. That's really important, actually, in terms of keeping me.
Okay.
I still recall, this was hilarious, actually, when I was finally appointed official CTO at Thomson, member of the executive committee, which meant that I was now a big poobah and had to go to the big corporate meetings. The headquarters called and said, "All right, we're planning the plan reviews for this." This was probably in December of 1996. Plan reviews for 97, or maybe 1 year earlier than that, which would typically be in November, where each of our businesses in Thomson, we're an $8 billion company with 150 business units. So we didn't get plans from all 150. We got plans from the 6 big divisions, right? And so they gave me the dates of the proposed dates that they wanted to schedule for the plan review. And it turns out one of them's opening day of deer hunting season. And I tell them, no way, that's opening day of deer season. And they take that down, take it seriously, and schedule around it. But apparently they told, the story goes all over headquarters. Well, this new CTO dude, he said we had to change the plan review date because it was the opening day of deer season. For me at the time, opening day of deer season was like a holiday, a holy day, right? Hadn't missed an opening day in, at that point, probably 20 years, right? And
okay.
So that was an
Clear
important
priorities. Clear priorities into some central elements of experiencing life beyond business, despite being, like you say, a hard-nosed business motherfucker.
Yeah,
okay.
Pretty hard. Yeah, pretty obsessed, right, with the business game.
Okay. Gym 92. All right. Let's hop back to Gym now and see and do the same exercise for Jim now and see what we then find in terms of delta between those. Okay, so let's start in the same order. Propositions. What? Oh no. Let's start exactly in the same order and say and channel Jim today. So let's give us a little sense of what does it feel like to be Jim today before we go into the propositions to really get away from 92.
Yeah, let's say today, personally, I don't give a shit about business. I did do some investing and advising and stuff after I retired. I retired very early in 2001 at the age of 47. I basically said, all right, I've done enough in business. And I'm going to go back to science. In fact, I was quoted in the New York Times, who was quite surprised. Internet CEO wants to do what? And I said, life of a CEO is a mile wide and an inch deep. I want to be an inch wide and a mile deep. So I did do one more little business thing later, but in general, I hung up my sword at that point and dug into learning about the world, thinking about the world as a general thing, right? So, I have no interest in the game of business. If people want to talk to me about the game of business, I just go, oh, boring. Though I do talk to a lot of young people, give them some advice, the wit and wisdom. It's worth every penny they pay for it, which is nothing. So, that's quite different. But to go back to the some of the first things I talked about, which is my bigger metaphysical views of the world. Certainly one of the things I was getting into right before I retired from business and became the focus of much of my interest in the years after is a much more sophisticated and I think accurate view of the nature of the reality we find ourselves in. That it's still a realist. I still believe that there is a real world out there, and it's not all in our heads. We're not brains in a vat. Though I can't prove it. I've gotten smart enough. I've read enough philosophy now. So I never read philosophy. I thought those guys were wankers of the worst sort, right? That can't prove any of this, right? As far as we know, the universe could have flicked into existence 5 seconds ago with all the fossils in the ground, all of our memories in our head, and then the universe will flick out of existence in 5 seconds. Can't disprove that proposition. There's lots of things that we can't disprove. They're logically possible. But to get any traction in the world, we have to make some assumptions. And so I make the assumption of realism and lawfulness. And I laid a lot of this out in an essay called Minimum Viable Metaphysics. And I have a version 2 that's just about to hit Substack. Maybe by the time this is published, it'll be out. It'll be set up to get it out. And where I make the point. Can't prove any of this, but if you're going to have traction in the world, you have to put down some markers and act upon them. And then the third one, and this is one that's very different from Jim 1992, is I now see the world as mostly emergent, that the lawfulness is down at a low level. Things like what's an electron like, and how do quarks come together to produce a proton, and how do 2 hydrogen atoms bind. But as you start moving up the stack of complexity in the world, it's a lot of it driven by far from equilibrium energy flows that produce cycles that produce truly novel things, right? And that this novelty is as real as an electron. That you and I are real things, and that the 27 layers of emergence, according to Harold Morowitz, that lead to humans, or at least social humans, are real things, and they are the architecture of what makes the universe interesting. The lawful level, way down below, it's necessary, and if we didn't have the lawful level we had, the kinds of emergences we have wouldn't have been possible. But all the interesting stuff is at the layers above that, and I would say that is a truly fundamental, different perspective, which also then leads to understanding that politics and economics are far harder than I would have thought they were. That it's not just a few knobs that you can set. They're both such complex domains. You really can't say anything with any great precision in terms of predicting the future. If you go back to history, you see that attempts to predict the future are generally very, very wrong, and that the universe is much more contingent and just in principle, or almost in principle, impossible to predict really, really very far out. And so those are all, I think, quite fundamentally different perspectives. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. It means, though, that you have to aim. You have a vision of where you want to go, but then you have to think of steps between here and there, each of which is a learning opportunity to try to steer towards where you think you want to go. And of course, after a while, you may discover that where you think you want to go ain't really there, it's over here. And so far more contingent, far more lack of knowledge about our ability to actually drive the future.
Mm-hmm. Why did these things become more salient to you? What would you say?
Gradual learning. I would say in the I think I know when I ordered my first book on complexity, it was like 1997. And I just started running across these ideas, and they started making a lot of sense to me. I go, of course, yes. I could actually see it. I could see how the degrees of freedom increased hugely as, let's just say, the chemicals involved got longer. Right? When you're talking about fusion, you're talking about, at least initially, H2 and helium, really the only two. Lithium, just a teeny bit. But so basically just two quite simple, lawful, pretty much, particles. Start talking about life, you're talking about very long proteins, which are chains of amino acids, and nucleic acids that have the informational domain in them, and the fatty acids, which have the membrane in them. And they're all different. When you look at the proteins floating around inside your cell, there's tens of thousands of different ones, and they flop around. Even if the ones that happen to have the same amino acid, they're physically shaped different ways. And so when you really start to understand that, of course you can't predict what's going to happen microsecond by microsecond in a cell, unless you had the whole universe made out of a computronium to do the calculation. Even then, you probably couldn't do it. As the world built emergence, it was also building openness to new things that we can't even imagine. And so a step at a time, I came up that tree, probably starting in 95 or 96. And then when I laid down my business sword, started doing my own research, it was in a subset of the complex range. It was evolutionary computing. And then I got invited to go out to the Santa Fe Institute, and I really got to learn how to think about complexity from my 10 years there.
Okay. What about procedures? What kind of skills have you developed that are most salient now for Jim today?
Procedures. Well, until recently, I probably did more programming than I had done in most of my life. My first startup, I wrote most of the software the first year. But after that, the amount of software I wrote for production was tiny. My second startup, about 10 lines. And then as I got up in the world, became corporate executive, basically zero. I actually got back into programming at the Santa Fe Institute and discovered that I really liked it again. And so all the way through until the present, or just before the present, programming was a big deal to me, actually. But programming not in the sense of writing an accounting program, but programming in the sense of modeling, agent-based simulations, AIs that could learn games by themselves. I was one of the very first people that wrote self-learning game AIs that were a hybrid of genetic algorithms and neural nets, which much later Google perfected with its AlphaGo and AlphaZero and all that sort of stuff. I was actually doing that in 2001. So the intersection of complexity and programming and data structures and dynamics, I would say, was an area where I had quite substantial skill.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Okay.
see, what else did I have skill in? I would say one I developed is advising people as opposed to being a principal.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting.
What's the difference for you?
When I'm a principal, I'm kind of all in, right? Whatever needs to be done, I'll figure out what needs to be done or bring in the resources to make it happen. It's my responsibility, God damn it, and there's no limit to how intensely I will intervene. If I have to fire somebody and take over their job for a while, I will, right? And advising is very different, right? Because you know that you're not going to do that, and you try to have as much useful impact while wasting as little time as possible of the people you're advising. I was fortunate to get, by just the most random set of circumstances, end up as the chairman of a chip design software company not too long after I retired. And these were a great bunch of young Canadian guys who've been students together at the University of Saskatoon and had all worked at Northern Telecom. We're out doing a startup. And I think that's where I really learned how to advise. And I also learned that if you're going to be advising, you better select for people who are advisable, right? People who actually do want to hear what somebody else has to say and are open to hearing what other people say. And since then, I basically always had some number of either young mentees or companies I was advising, or generally a group of both. And I've really enjoyed that. And I think I've gotten pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that's certainly a new skill. I was about to say, towards the end of in the middle and at the end of my business career, I had multiple offers to join venture capital firms, including some relatively high-toned ones. And I always said no. I said, I'm a doer, I'm not a guy that just wants to pick and choose and be an asshole at the board meetings. That's not me. I want to do things, roll up my sleeve, jump in, and I still think that was the right decision for me. I don't think I would have liked to be a VC. But I would say the advising and, being on boards and things like that was a bit VC-ish in some regards. In that, and I did invest my own money in most of the companies I was involved with. Not a lot, but, medium. I think that was a clear new set of business-related skills that I had. And then, of course, the other one is, how I spent my time, right? Didn't have to work anymore, 12-hour days, goodbye, right? And I'd always been a reader of a lot of stuff. But my reading even increased. I read a huge amount in various domains. First in complexity and evolutionary computing, and then in systems, nonlinear dynamics, which is a key underlying component of complexity science. And then a real interesting one was starting in 2013, I did a 3-year deep dive into cognitive science and cognitive neuroscience. And really, I could talk shit to the leading thinkers in the world, right? Do I know as much as they do? No, but I can hang in there with them. From 3 years of deep reading in those domains. So how I spent my time and what I did with it was, I think, also a major change, and particularly learning things pretty deeply.
Learning, yeah, and through reading.
Yep.
Your reader. Yeah. Okay. Let's hop into perspectival and see if there are some more things there than for Gym 92.
Yeah, I would say yes, going out and getting involved in even from the very beginning, the complexity science, evolutionary computing. I was fortunate to find some mentors at a nearby university, and I started going by there once a week, spending the afternoon there. And I realized very quickly that science is very different than business, right? very few people in science know very much. Everybody has a little wedge, and if you're going to really think about science seriously, you got to learn how to learn from other people in a very serious way. And I very quickly learned fundamental things from people that I would have never gotten to on my own. So I would say the meta perspectival was the importance of perspective. And then person after person after person and subdiscipline after subdiscipline after subdiscipline I interacted with and took away new perspectives on problems. For instance, deterministic chaos, right? I had no idea what the hell that was. But once you see deterministic chaos, it's everywhere. It fundamentally changes how you think about reality. The famous Stuart Kaufman, Edge of Order and Disorder. In fact, I read his magnum opus, Origins of Order, 1998, before I was formally involved with Santa Fe Institute. And that was like, holy shit. This is a way of thinking about things with very simple models that you can make literally with string and buttons that is like insanely different from how we think the world is. And it's almost certainly true, right? So I would say that the really strongest perspectival new things was, one, learning the utter importance of it when one's doing science, and then just rolling through a whole bunch of them and adding them to my working kit of trying to understand the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a definite deep change between Jim then and Jim now. Understanding the deep necessity of perspective, and then in typical Jim stance, finding the most powerful way to add perspectives as fast and deeply as you can.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Okay, participatory. What's in Jim's being in life landscape of Jim now in the participatory knowing sense?
That's a good question. Yeah. Again, a lot of it comes from being able to structure my time how I want, and do what I want, and within constraints of what my wife wants, right, and the kids want, etc. Today, considerably bigger piece of my time is invested in family stuff. My wife and I do a lot of things together, spend a lot of time together. We're best friends, as well as we'll be married 45 years in June. We're also best friends. And, we often go on 6-week road trips. And people say, how the hell could you sit in the car with your spouse for 6 weeks? And I go, oh, we love it. It's great. So we spend lots of time together. We spend a lot of time with our daughter and our 2 grandkids, and all the things that go with that. And so those are a big part of who I am. I've recently taught my 5-year-old granddaughter how to play chess, and she's obsessed with it, which is really fun. And so you think through, okay, how often do you intentionally lose with a 5-year-old, right? And I've come to the answer, it's about 50-50, right? Keep them excited. And but of course, as she gets better, I'll modulate that a little bit. And so sort of thinking through how to keep her enthusiasm strong while making sure she gets better is kind of a very interesting kind of metacognitive activity that brings to bear everything I know about everything, probably, right? At this point of arrival. Now, our farm, I don't do the farm work anymore, nor have I in a long time, but we still, have our farm. In fact, where I'm sitting today, and such. I do much less hunting and fishing than I used to. Probably do more open-ended socializing with people we know, either around here or we have a condo in town, a little small city where we spend time. So, dinner parties, hanging out, doing this, doing that. So it's I'm at the point where I've switched bigger percentage to the personal rather than the professional or paraprofessional.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the other new thing I started doing is writing. Right. is I've been doing my podcast. Oh, of course, I've mentioned my podcast. Been doing that since 2019, and done like 560 episodes, something crazy like that. And hugely enjoyable getting to talk to some of the smartest people in the world about some of the most interesting topics. And I will immodestly say I've gotten pretty good at it. At least people tell me I have, right? And I'm not Joe Rogan, but I'm kind of mid-tier podcaster. And I've recently reformulated my podcast to do something a bit different, which I'm enjoying very much. Just did the third one of those Friday. So that's the thing. But I also started putting stuff out on Substack. Been on a bit of a hiatus for the last 3 months, but I'm about to start shooting out a bunch of stuff. And I really enjoyed that too. So I continue, I've finally gotten to the point where, especially with the help of AI, a little bit of help, especially the copy editing, I can really write pretty rapidly now and reasonably well. So that's been fun to discover in my old age.
Okay. So a huge shift, and I mean, if I had to sum it up, I would say on the propositional, you move from a Newtonian market-driven perspective to an emergence and complexity-driven perspective set of propositions, and in the procedural, very much on the executional lens, the elements in making business happen, to more modeling approaches and agent-based modeling to explore potential trajectories, but not to build rigorously towards something. And then in the perspectival, from a very singular perspective to the flip side. So a strong theory of meta perspective, and then enacting that by a rigorous learning regime. And in the participatory, from a very aligned with the other three elements, a grounded, I would maybe say grounded citizen, to a much more relational and playful stance in the participatory. Would you say that's a rough first stab at the delta?
Yeah, I would say so. Though it's one thing I didn't mention, which I'll add, is I did refer to it in the early part, which is that I thought people were rational and the actions they took to fulfill their needs were probably reasonable ones for them to do. What I've come to realize, which comes from the complexity view and the cognitive science work, et cetera, a bunch of other stuff, is that people are made by the game that they're in, and that the game that they're in may be way suboptimal for true human well-being and flourishing. And I strongly believe that to be the case in our current world. If you asked me in 1992, I'd say, yeah, people are about as happy as they can be, right? Considering the constraints of scarcity. And today I'd say probably not even fucking close, because of the way the game can program the people that are in it. I think that's a really important
perspective. What would Jim 92 think about Jim now?
Naive hippie.
And how does that feel for you?
Because hey, both are. I think both perspectives are legit for where I was based on the experiences that I had.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that Jim 92 was particularly an idiot. I just think he'd only been exposed to certain things, and so he'd only integrated certain things into his worldview. And from the things he had integrated into his worldview, his perspective was a pretty good one. He was a pretty good game-made motherfucker, right?
Would you say that evolution is aligned with what people like Bob Kegan say about the developmental hierarchy?
not 100% sure. Because I will say, even in Gym 92, had a pretty rich level of hierarchical complexity to my thinking,
Mm-hmm.
at least at the 99th percentile.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was not so much the architecture of my mind as it was the premises that I operated from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think I was any dumber or any smarter then. Maybe a little dumber now, but not much.
But I think the model of hierarchical complexity is different from the model of Keegan, in such that it actually talks more about phase shifts of how you actually engage with the world, and in that moving through those phases into a modality of being more in service. To me, that seems very aligned, right? From a self. So I think circa 92 very much in self-authoring mode, whereas today much more, even if not almost entirely in a serving modality for the whole.
Well, okay, that's is that Keegan? Okay, I don't remember. I keep all these fucking hierarchical, all these list dudes get all confused in my head. But yeah, I would say today it's almost entirely service. I refuse to be paid by people for it anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
just do what I do because I want to do it. And I think it'll help the world, make the world a better place. So yeah, I would say that I'm almost entirely in a make the better place mode these days. And Gym 92 was, understand the game and win, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do it ethically. I would say that I was always strongly biased towards the ethical, and I despised business people that were not ethical. And of course, if you play in the higher ranks of business, you run into all kinds of unethical motherfuckers, right? Unethical in lots of different ways. But I would never do anything that I thought was maybe once, that I thought was unethical. But otherwise, I was, about understanding the game and winning the game. Today, I understand that the game is way more open-ended, way harder to predict. I do think it's hugely important to nudge the game in a direction I think is good, and that's what I spend a fair bit of my time doing.
I just pulled up the layers of Keegan just to boot them up here properly. So the 5 main levels are starting with impulsive, which is typical for early childhood, so driven by impulses, followed by imperial or self-sovereign. So older children, adolescents and adults, so you're organized around your own needs and interests and wishes. Then the socialized, which according to Keegan is common in adults. So the identity is shaped by your relationships, and your belonging. Self-authoring, which reaches some adults, is stepping out of that and developing an internal value system or ideology, and stepping away from the expectations of others, which is very strong in you. And then the 5th one is self-transforming. So this is the inter-individual, which, according to Keegan, is rare or is only reached midlife later, or if at all, where you reflect on and revise your own systems and identities, and you can hold multiple frameworks at once and tolerate paradox and all of these things. So to me, this sounds very much aligned with that, in that you definitely had stepped out of the socialized into self-authoring, and but now you're definitely in the self-transforming modality.
Probably. I don't know. One
Okay.
thing we haven't talked about, which we talked about once before about this journey, was I can pinpoint a fairly specific time in my life when the pivot started from
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
92 Jim to 2026 Jim. You
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, maybe as a segue to see. So the reason why I'm talking about Keegan is Keegan posits that this moving through these layers is something every human being is inherently capable of, given enough time. And I would extend that a little bit and say, give enough density of life, right? So that if you do 9 to 5 and you have to care for the kids in the morning and then the evening and all the other maintenance that you do to do and then watch Netflix, then you don't have a lot of density of life. Whereas if you manage to really pack in a lot of experience, there's high density, which then might lead to more experienced life, which leads to a faster trajectory through the layers. And the interest is in how can a person find ways to increase density of life in order to move across these skills faster. That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah,
So
that's an
with that
interesting.
framing, let's go to 96 then.
Or 94. And
94,
this
94.
was from my online world, which I'm still very active. It might have been actually close to the pinnacle of my online world involvement. It was on the Well, which still exists, the oldest probably existing online community. I'm still a member, well.com. No ads, no algorithms, but they charge you $15 a month for interacting with some very interesting folks. But anyway, at the time, I was mostly interested in the political discussions and book discussions and things of that sort. But somehow I stumbled into a conference called Sustainability, and the Well was a spinoff of the Whole Earth catalog. So there were some like famous people like Paul Hawkins, other Kevin Kelly. There were some well-known people who were thinkers about this stuff way beyond. I mean, I vaguely was aware of some of these issues, but it wasn't really front and center with me. But in the conversations with these people, I had a phase change in my thinking about the world, particularly one that I got from them and one that I constructed myself, which I handed to them and some of them started to use. The one that I got from them was the fact that we were approaching the limits of the planet. I hadn't really focused on that. I mean, I knew about the population bomb, but I'd also kind of poo-pooed it and get, the population bomb guy was wrong. There were no famines in the 90s. In fact, people were better fed than they'd ever been. The Green Revolution took care of it. See how smart the market is, right? But what I learned from these people, I mean, these were top gear ecologists, Stuart Brand, people like that, that okay, we dodged that bullet, but there's another one coming, right? At some point, we will be at these limits. We're depleting our topsoil, we're depleting our aquifers, we're polluting the ocean with all kinds of shit. We're creating chemicals. I mean, these people knew all this stuff in 1994, and I didn't. And so I learned a whole lot of stuff from them, and that let's say, the high Western way of life was just fundamentally unsustainable, and particularly as the rest of the world demanded its chance to drive Ford pickup trucks and order, huge box loads of plastic junk toys from China, right? And so I go, fuck, right? And then they also talked about climate change much more than I'd ever heard from anybody. As I said, I knew the science of it a bit, but I wasn't very high in my salient stack. And the conversations there raised it in the salient stack quite a bit. And I go, fuck, another way we're going to be fucked if we don't change our ways. And then here's the leap that I had personally, which I then handed back to the community, which is the thing that keeps, this is a little naive, but it's all right. You got to start somewhere. The thing that keeps this pathological way of life going and cohering and growing exponentially is advertising. That advertising programs us for what are what our perceived needs are, and particularly the status games that we're playing. And that because of this loop, that the creation of products creates profit, the profit's reinvested in advertising to continue to program and evolve the new needs. Okay, now we have, pickup trucks have gotten bigger in the United States since 1994. They're like the size of a fucking aircraft carrier, right? And so there's this reflexive cycle that keeps people locked in. Now, I had a very interesting experience yesterday that just reinforced this. My wife and I pretty rigorously program our life to avoid seeing or hearing advertising on streaming or audio media. We listen to public radio. We pay the extra $3 a month to not get ads. So we hardly ever see ads in the high impact audio or visual ads. But I did want to watch one of the football playoff, American football, that is, football playoff games yesterday. So it was a wonderful game. The Seahawks against the Rams, one of the better football games I've seen in a long while. But it was chock full of horrendous advertising. Yes, must have been 10 ads for gigantic aircraft carrier size American trucks for the most vile, heart-stopping fast food. My favorite was the cheeseburger floating in a pool of melted cheese, right? Sports betting apps. You could just go down the list and go, what the fuck? Whose idea of this is the things that you should be reinforcing for human flourishing within ecological limits? And so it was like, whoa. And, I tell people, if you want to get ready for game B, the first thing to do is to cut yourself off from these high impact ads. These things are just convincing you that this is what it is to be a human in the 21st century. In 2026 is your aircraft carrier truck, your vile fast food, which is addicting as hell and bad for you, and sports gambling, yay, right? At the time, I proposed that advertising be limited to 2 minutes per hour in 1994, and didn't have a stopwatch with me, but I'll bet it was more like 25 minutes an hour at least on the NFL football game. So I would say that is a huge perspective that came from that insight that I had, basically an aha, that the game was terminal eventually, and its own internals caused it to cohere, essentially, particularly advertising. And now I'd add a lot of other things, which are the status games that we learn as children from our parents, for instance, right? Are things that cause it to cohere. We all humans play status games of one sort or another. And the ones that are laid out for us in our youth, and probably particularly in our teen years, tend to be the ones that we capture. I was lucky, and this may just be genetic, possibly my parents also, because they weren't much into these games. I never much gave a shit about the social status games, the ones that people said you were supposed to do. You were supposed to wear this particular brand of clothes because it was cool. I go, what the fuck, stupid ass bullshit. I buy exactly equivalent for half the price. Why the hell should I buy brand X just because people think brand X is cool? I would say my parents also shared that view. So I did probably get some of that from my parents, probably some genetic. And my two brothers, same way. We were relatively immune. I'm not to say we didn't want fast cars and things of that ilk, but most people are not immune, and they get programmed with status games, which are probably the strongest thing that keeps us in the basin of attraction of the current socioeconomic system.
Interesting. So my parents bought whatever they thought was the highest quality in terms of clothing, but then they took the labels off to ensure that nobody knew what we were wearing. So and I think that's a version of that same thing.
Yep, that's the flip side. My parents always bought the cheapest stuff that was useful. And both of them were quite expert at finding the cheapest stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I remember my mom noticing the degradation of quality in some brands over time and commenting on that when I was a kid. Um, as the commercial pressures were forcing that enshittification on the brands, right? So it was very, very interesting insights that I was given, like in passing, and also the advertising I can completely mirror. I am happy to pay my way into an ad-free life wherever I can. So, and I hardly see any advertising. I just had this very similar experience a couple of weeks ago with my kid. We wanted to watch a very specific movie, and the only way we could watch that specific movie was by also watching ads, which was the first time in years that I'd seen ads, and it was just as you described it. So, very, very interesting to be outside of that for many, many years, and then being exposed to it again really gives you a sense of how sick it is. And so stepping out just experimentally for like a couple of months and then stepping back in gives you maybe the delta you need to really grok what that does to your system.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I talked to a lot of people about this, and a lot of them are quite surprised when I say the first step is to disconnect from streaming type high impact advertising, because they're so used to, they think they're just tuning it out, right? Oh, I don't listen to that shit. And I go, well, your subconscious brain is hearing all these messages. Your subconscious brain was evolved to fit in socially with other people, and if all the other people are talking about cheeseburgers floating in melted cheese and aircraft carrier sized trucks, at some level, you're being programmed to think those things are socially desirable.
So I think we're at the end of our time here that we slotted into our calendars. And I also think that's I think we achieved what I was hoping for, to see that delta with more clarity, right? Between the different kinds of worldviews that you inhabited across life, and I'm grateful for the courage and openness that you could let us into the kind of naive, slightly embarrassing worldview of Jim 92. So that was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought I was when you proposed this a week ago. I go, I don't know about that, but what the fuck? But for the coming week, I sat and thought about it, and I go, yeah, I could do that. What the hell? Let's give it a fire.
Yeah.
Let's fire it up.